Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tech Champions. I'm your host, Daniel Beaty, CTO with AuditMax in Jacksonville, Florida. As you know, we take time each week to sit down with thought leaders and industry experts in the field of technology. We love to hear about their journey and their mission and get their take on the latest trends in the industry. We always have great guests on the show. Today, joining us from Stowe, Ohio, is Larry Sage. Larry, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
Yeah, great. Glad you could be on. So Larry, you're currently the VP of IT and Strategic Initiatives at Mactac. But give us a little bit of background, how you got to that point and some of your personal journey.
Okay. So, like you said, I'm with Mactac. I've been with Mactac for about 23 years. I'm actually on my second tour of duty, if you will. I began at the company back in '95 through really a Y2K initiative. Kind of worked my way up the ranks. I didn't intend to be in IT. Really wanted to be in marketing. I have a communications degree, so really just kind of fell into IT. But I've always enjoyed computers. I've always enjoyed technology, and so it was a really good fit. So during my tenure at Mactac, I've had the great opportunity to not only maybe focus on in development, so writing code, actually building out a system, but really had the opportunity to really embrace a lot of different technologies. And again, over the past 25 years, if you think about technology, it's really expanded. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think that I actually started in this before the internet was really a widespread thing. So I got to kind of watch how all that's evolved. So for me in my career, a lot of it has been taking advantage of the different opportunities. So while at Mactac, I've moved into the management realm. I actually took a stint for a couple of years as we developed our supply chain organization, and then had an opportunity in 2010 to go to Europe for 2 years as part of an SAP implementation. Got to take my whole family and really just experience an expat situation. So it was a great opportunity for me. Came back to the States, and at that point, there's some things that had kind of occurred, and so I actually left the company for a bit, worked for a couple different companies, and about 2013, 14, got the call back from my previous boss, if you will, from the supply chain days, and he had moved up into being the CEO, and brought me back to Mactac. And so over the past 5 years, have been really just riding the wave. We've had a lot of transition in the company. If you look at the history of our company, it's just been, especially the past 5 years, it's been a whirlwind of change. And it's exciting. I'm part of the drawback for me was to really get the opportunity to come back. And, I can say that I get a pretty much wide open door to explore a lot of different technologies, even though obviously in a manufacturing sector, there's a little bit of constraint there. But yeah, really, I've always just been a learner, and so I continue to try to do that. And so now we're looking at 2021 and all the things that we've gone through this past year. We've got a lot of exciting projects underway, and so yeah, that's kind of where we're at. That's my background, and that's what it's me.
That's great. No, that's great, Larry. Thanks for sharing some of your story there. I think we call you the boomerang employees that go. They leave, then they come back.
Right.
They can be some of the best.
Right.
So absolutely. And you've been in the game a long time. You probably installed some Windows 3.1 back in the day, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So 2020 is over, and I think everybody's pretty excited about that. Vaccines out, and we're sort of have our eye on some normalcy. And we hear a lot about that phrase, the new normal, and everybody's had to pivot this year. But what are some things that you feel like may be permanent in the world of IT based on this last year?
Well, I definitely think for a lot of companies, this concept of work from anywhere. We've always been able to VPN into our main systems, and a lot of folks obviously with laptops and cell phones, and everybody's been kind of already mobile. But I think really kind of shoring up that infrastructure to make sure that is seamless for users that may not be as familiar with that. I know in our company, we had to deploy 2 call centers remotely. And so fortunately, we had the backbone in place to do that. But I think that's something that we're going to have to really look at. I know a lot of companies are looking at Now that we are remote and it's working, you start looking at what you have in the folks in the building, and you start kind of reimagining, especially for companies. I would look at our company like as a manufacturing company, and we've really, I think we've really changed a lot over 2020, and understanding that we can do these things. I think the other big thing that I've seen, and I continue to see more of, and I think we will, is this sort of normalization of video conferencing, doing things, kind of similar to what we're doing, where, I don't have to go to a room, or I don't need the special equipment. I simply open up my laptop, or I get my tablet or phone, and I'm communicating one way, not just with audio, but video as well. So I think that's going to be a new norm. I also think, again, as we look at security, so obviously a lot of us in the IT realm have watched what's happened down in Austin. I think, when it comes to this remote atmosphere and what we're doing, we've got to look at security a lot differently. And so I think those are some of the things that won't change and will continue on. But I think companies very much are going to have to, I think it's a new norm, but I also think there'll be some that will struggle to sustain this.
Yep. Yeah, I think those are all great answers, really. And we joked earlier about even us at AuditMax, we let people come back on a volunteer basis, and nobody really volunteered. So, and that
Right.
Everybody's at home, and that does change the security piece, because you've got, people pulling out a laptop that's been in the closet for 4 years, and they're gonna connect to your network using that, and there's
Right.
new dynamics for sure. So, and you talked some, Larry,
Right.
about that concept of practical IT. What do you mean by that?
Well, again, I think part of it for me, being in it for over 20 years, I have, my IT team is actually, if I look at my entire IT team, we're well over, probably a few hundred years of experience if you add it all up. And I think when I think about IT, a lot of times we tend to make what we do very complex. We like to speak in terms that sometimes can get confusing and allow folks to really not understand things. So when I talk about practical IT, I think it's making IT so that it's palatable for everyone. I mean, again, everybody has cell phones. There's so much technology in the world. And a lot of times, there's a lot of complexity that has to go with that. But I think a lot of times in IT, we almost revel in that. We get excited about that. And so I think getting to a point where we can explain it better, where we can articulate the technology without overwhelming people. The other thing that I would say that fits into this, for, I guess if you would call it a philosophy for me, is what I've seen over the past 20 years is everybody's specialized. And, when you look at our industry, it's whether it's within networking, whether it's within business IT or what have you, or development, everybody is specialized. We use a lot of acronyms. We use a lot of just specialty items. And there's very few folks that can really take a broad brush over all of the different spectrums and really be able to work with any of those. And it's not that you're going to be an expert in all of those. And, I think I look at myself as sort of a jack of all trades, master of none. I know a lot of different technologies, but then I know how to tap into the folks that have the more deeper experiences and things. And what I'm finding is that a lot of people that have come into IT really in the past 10, 15 years, they've been sort of promoted into the specialty realm, and yet not being able to take a step back and see how information technology fits across the spectrum of business. And they lose sight of that. And so I think when I think about practical IT, I think of really exploring how all of it links together, as opposed to getting so specialized where you can't, if for instance, if you're working as a network developer or a network engineer and you don't understand how the business applications interact, that can lead to problems. And so that's a lot of it, what it is. I think, again, taking the mysticism out of what we do and really being able to communicate, especially if you're in a company like mine where, the business folks and IT are very intertwined. You got to be able to, they used to say in the business world, sort of work within the ladder. And I think a lot of IT folks struggle on being able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's great, Larry. I love your approach there. And, it's been interesting for me to watch over the last decade IT really moved from like tech support, where all they felt like all they had to do was make everything run, and get the computers working, to being integral part of the business, right? Where they're being invited to the table when they're talking about new initiatives and things like that. It's not just they're not a separate
Right.
entity that just makes everything run. But I want to spend a couple minutes on project management. I know you've done a number of years of your career in the PM world. So everybody's got a ton of projects going right now. Every group that I talk to just feels overwhelmed, especially this year. I think people took a bunch of initiatives thinking they would have extra time, and it didn't necessarily work out that way. But what are some practical tips for prioritizing all those IT projects?
Well, I think, first and foremost, you've got to understand and have a very in some ways, a very simplistic tool set or a platform. It's funny you mentioned that when I saw those questions. Over the years, early on in my career, I got the PMI certification. So I got this, got all the things. I got into MS Project, did all these elaborate things. I've worked in several different portfolio tools. And where we are today, and kind of where I came back to, is a very simplistic tool. And so I think that's important, that you don't get so caught up in the management of projects where you get caught up in the tool set. Microsoft offers a lot of different ways to put things together. And so you really got to kind of establish that, but then not make it so overly complex. So that's really the first thing. And the second thing is, for me, and is really knowing the stakeholders and then being willing to get them all to the table. Because a lot of times in that prioritization, especially in IT, we always seem to be the middleman, and you have to really balance all of that detail. So I think getting those stakeholders to the table, realizing that our job in IT and to manage these projects is not just to create tasks and to knock them out, but to really get folks to the table and help them help you to prioritize. I think the last thing that I tell my group all this the time, and I'm the worst at this, to be honest, is being realistic on what you can actually do. I'm always told I tend to overpromise and underdeliver, and so I'm always trying to balance of saying, okay, I know we have this mountain of things to do, but there's only so much time and so much resource, and I think we can balance and make that work. But at the same time, you have to be able to say, look, I know this is important. This is important to what you need to succeed. Here's a date that I can give you in the future. We can absolutely hit that date. And then you have to actually do that. And so I think a lot of it is just being realistic, and then really just a lot of communication, because a lot of times, especially in business, people understand there's going to be changing priorities. And so being very flexible with how you work and that communication really is the key. I mean, there's really no magic bullet to it. A lot of it really boils down to, just being realistic with expectations, making your project management, portfolio, or however you want to manage it, making it so that everybody understands it and not being overly complex.
Yep. Yeah,
so that's a lot of it, and again, picking the right tools. MS Project is great for some. Most people can't do it. And so a simple Excel task list allows you to get pretty darn far. So
yeah, no, that's great. And you mentioned resources. I mean, everybody's running pretty lean right now from a resource perspective. Yeah. Do you have any creative tips on allocating resources?
Well, I think a lot of it boils down to, and this is where I come back to that practical IT, is that when you develop a group or you develop a team that can really wear multiple hats and they can work in different technologies, you have a lot more opportunity to be able to allocate those resources. Now, in some cases, you're going to have certain specific tasks that only a certain resource can do. But a lot of the things that we do, especially in business IT, you usually have 2 or 3 people that can actually do those things. Now, again, you always have those folks, and I have this same thing going on where that's their favorite person. They always like working with that person. But at the same time, by broadening, and giving people more opportunities to learn and make some mistakes, but really learn different elements of IT, it allows you to basically be able to prioritize some of that better on the resources. I think for me, that's been the big key, because like you said, at the end of the day, we're always going to have, more projects than we can do. I tell my group all the time, look, within IT, we're a lot of times in our company, and our company is not unique. We're here to service the business. And so we're never going to have enough resources. We're never going to have enough time. But at the same time, for all of us to succeed and for us to continue to help our customers or our companies, we've got to be a lot more flexible with that. And so I think for me, that's really the key. And then into my group, being willing to do some things that are a little bit out of your comfort zone. I've got several examples of individuals that, they've really had to get stretched. Maybe they weren't good with mobile technology, and it was like, okay, I need you to go and actually help. These individuals, they're having trouble with how they're interacting on their cell phones. And that's kind of why can't they go to the Verizon store? Well, no, I mean, that's part of you learning. And so really just
Right.
making those opportunities for folks, I think, is very helpful.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Larry. I appreciate it. And unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you one final question. Since we're tech champions, what's one characteristic you think it takes to become a tech champion?
Well, I think it's funny because it's been the theme throughout this, and I think it's not getting stuck in doing things the same way. I think when you look at how technology has evolved over the past 20 years, we are working and doing everything very differently, and there's a constant state of change. I like to, I kind of always bring up the Microsoft model because, Microsoft has been one of those companies that has continued to evolve and change. And a lot of times I say they create solutions to problems we don't have yet, or we may never have. But this
Right.
idea of just always being willing to try different things. But the caveat is that there are times, though, where you can't always go after that shiny penny or that new thing, and being consistent in what you're doing. So I think that takes a lot of it. And I think really, and again, it sounds cliche, but always being a learner. I mean, there's a ton. We live in a great time, and we can find out anything in the world. I think it was like a few weeks ago, I heard Elon Musk talking about how there's everything that you can learn is at your fingertips. And so I think being that type of an individual will allow you to continue. And really, I mean, I've never been, heard the term tech champion, but I think that's really, when I think of that term, that's really kind of how I would approach that.
All right. No, that's great. That's great. So, Larry, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate it. You provided some great insight. If people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to find you? LinkedIn, or do you have an email address? Or
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn. Again, I try to keep up on my social media presence. I actually, on a side note and whatnot, this year I've said I'm going to finally release a podcast and do some things. But with everything, it's always stuff. But yeah, if you want to reach out via LinkedIn, as long I will put the caveat out there. Please don't try to sell me anything. I seem to get a lot of vendors, and especially after a while, you're like, okay, I just don't have time. But yeah, if you want to reach out via LinkedIn, certainly feel free. Obviously, if you go out to mactac.com and learn more about our company, that's always a great opportunity as well. But yeah, it's good to be here. It's an interesting endeavor. I'm looking forward to seeing how all this comes out.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Larry Sage. Appreciate it, guys. And to our audience, thank you for joining. I'm your host, Daniel Beaty. We'll see you next time on Tech Champions.